What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? A horse that stands in the quiet of a barn that still smells like her, like sawdust and leather and the faint, sweet perfume she always wore. For Elias, the answer was nothing. You do nothing, you just keep moving. The crunch of frost under his worn leather boots was the only sound that mattered this morning. It was late November in the high desert, and the air had the kind of sharp, clean bite that promised a hard winter. It stole the warmth from the coffee in his mug and burrowed deep into the worn fabric of his jacket. He'd lived here, in the shadow of Ghost Canyon, for 20 years. But this was the first autumn he was walking it alone. The barn door groaned on its hinges, a sound like a tired old man sighing. Inside, the air was still and thick with memories. Dust motes danced like tiny ghosts in the single beam of pale sunlight slanting through a high window. Her jacket still hung on a peg by the door. He couldn't bring himself to move it. He couldn't bring himself to look at it for too long either. In the far stall, a shape shifted in the deep shadows. A snort. Low and soft. The sound of warm air hitting the cold. It was him. The Mustang. Lena's last project. Her obsession. The reason she'd been out in the canyons that day. Elias moved without thinking, his body a machine of chores. He scooped the grain, the metal scoop scraping against the bin, a sound that echoed in the cathedral silence. He didn't look toward the stall. Not yet. He just listened to the horse's quiet movements. The soft stamp of a hoof, the rustle of hay, sounds that used to be a comfort, a backdrop to the music of their life. Now they were just reminders of the silence. He'd found the Mustang himself a week after he'd found her. The search party had given up. But he hadn't. He'd found the horse standing over her empty saddle, reins broken, lather dried on its coat, looking not wild, but lost. An animal the color of dust and twilight, with a jagged white slash of a marking over its left eye, like a crack in old porcelain. Lena had called him. Well, Elias couldn't remember the name. She had a dozen for him, all whispered in the barn when she thought no one was listening. He just called him the horse. It was easier that way. Safer. He carried the grain bucket over, his boots scuffing a rhythm on the packed dirt floor. As he approached, the horse's head came up. Its ears, sharp and alert, swiveled to track his every move. The eye with the white mark seemed to hold the cold morning light, watching him with an unnerving stillness. This wasn't the soft, domesticated gaze of the other horses he'd known. This was different, wary, ancient. Elias unlatched the stall door, the cold metal biting at his fingertips. He never went inside. He just tipped the grain into the feeder, his movements slow, deliberate, predictable. The horse knew the routine. It would wait until he was gone before it would eat, but not today. Today the horse didn't move toward the grain. It just stood there in the center of the stall watching him. Its nostrils flared, pulling in his scent. A low rumble started deep in its chest, a vibration more felt than heard. Elias felt a prickle of something on his neck. Annoyance, fear. He wasn't sure. He just wanted to finish the chores. To get back inside where the quiet was just quiet, not filled with the ghost of a 1,000-pound animal that had been the last living thing to see his wife alive. He turned to fill the water trough, the hose stiff with cold. The water hissed as it hit the galvanized steel. His back was to the stall, but he could feel the horse's gaze on him. He could feel its presence like a change in air pressure. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of the filling trough. He knew he should just leave. Latch the barn door, walk back to the house, and let the day swallow him whole, just like every other day for the past 5 months. But his feet felt rooted to the spot. He slowly, deliberately, turned off the water. The sudden silence was absolute, deafening. He took a breath, and he turned around. The Mustang was standing at the open stall door. It hadn't crossed the threshold, but it was closer than it had ever been before. Its head was low, neck outstretched. It wasn't aggressive. It was curious. Elias stood perfectly still. He remembered Lena's voice, a soft murmur from years ago, teaching him, "Don't look them in the eye. Not at first. Let them come to you. Let them know you're not a predator." So he looked down at his own boots. He watched his own breath plume in the frigid air. He waited. 1 second, 2, 10. The world seemed to shrink to the space of that barn. to the 15 feet of packed earth that separated man and horse. Then, a sound. The soft, deliberate scuff of a hoof. And another. He didn't dare look up. He just listened. The horse was walking toward him, slow, cautious. He could hear it breathing now, a deep, rhythmic sound like the tide coming in. He could feel the warmth of its body cutting through the cold air before he felt anything else. He smelled it, that unmistakable scent of horse and desert dust and something wild that could never be tamed. A dark shape entered his peripheral vision. A muzzle, scarred and soft, hovered just inches from his jacket sleeve. Elias held his breath. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. He could feel the horse's warm breath through the layers of his clothes. It sniffed his arm, its whiskers twitching, tickling the worn fabric. Every instinct told him to pull away, to retreat to the safety of his numbness. This was her horse. This was a living, breathing monument to his failure, to his loss. But his body wouldn't move. The horse let out a long, slow sigh, a puff of warm air that fogged in the space between them, and then it did something else. It rested its head, the heavy, solid weight of it, against his shoulder. The contact was electric. It shot through him, a jolt of warmth that cracked the ice that had been forming around his heart for months. He felt the solid bone and muscle, the life force of this creature pressing into him. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was just a presence, a weight. A single hot tear escaped his eye, tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He hadn't cried. Not at the funeral, not in the empty bed, not once. But now, in the frozen silence of a barn that smelled like his dead wife, with her wild horse's head resting on his shoulder, the dam began to crack. The weight was too much. The connection was too raw. He flinched back, a sharp, involuntary movement. The horse lifted its head instantly, taking a step back, its dark eyes wide. The moment was shattered. The space between them filled with cold air again. Shame and anger and a grief so profound it felt like it would split him in two washed over Elias. He turned his back on the horse. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. He strode toward the barn door, needing to get out, to get away, to be anywhere else. He pulled the heavy door open, letting the blinding, cold light of the morning flood in. He took one step out into the frost and then another. He stopped. Behind him from the barn he heard it, the soft, hesitant thud of hooves on the dirt floor. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, frozen on the threshold, listening. The hoof falls grew closer, stopping just inside the shadows of the doorway. He could feel the horse there, a few feet behind him. Waiting, he took another step. The hooves followed. He stopped again. They stopped with him. He didn't know how long they stood there. A man facing the empty, frozen landscape of his life, and a ghost at his back, tethered by a silence that felt heavier than any rope. The horse followed, not into the house, never that far. But every morning it would wait for him at the barn door, a silhouette against the rising sun. It would follow him on his lonely walks along the fence line, a silent shadow keeping a respectful distance. The winter deepened, burying the high desert in a blanket of porcelain quiet. The world became simple, stark, just a grieving man and the ghost at his back. Elias began to notice things, small, strange details that didn't fit. The horse, he learned, hated the wind when it came from the north. It would turn its back to the gale, head low, body braced as if against a memory. It would stand for hours staring at one particular notch in the distant canyon ridge, a place that held no meaning for Elias at all. And then there was the name. One afternoon, mending a frozen water pipe, his numb fingers fumbling with a wrench, Elias cursed under his breath. He was thinking of Lena, of how she would have made a joke of it, her laughter warming the frigid air. He remembered something she'd said once about a horse she'd dreamed of, a horse that could outrun the wind. A real traveler, she'd called it. Without thinking, the word slipped out of his own mouth, a ghost of a sound. Traveler. The Mustang's head, which had been dozing in a sliver of weak sunlight, snapped up. Its ears locked forward. Its entire body went rigid, coiled like a spring. It stared at Elias, not with wariness, but with an intense, piercing look of recognition, as if he had spoken its true name, a secret password to its soul. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He shook his head, dismissing it. A coincidence, an animal reacting to a sound. That's all it was. He was lonely. He was seeing patterns where there were none. He was a man starting to see ghosts in his own barn. He doubled down on his distance. He kept the chores brisk, the interactions brief. He built his walls higher, mortared them with routine. But the horse was patient. It would stand by the fence, watching him work, its warm breath fogging the air. It would nuzzle the empty space on the truck's passenger seat when he climbed in. It was a quiet, relentless siege on the fortress of his grief. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late February. A buckle on the Mustang's worn leather halter finally gave way to the cold and snapped. It was a simple thing, but it meant Elias had to go into the tack room, and open the one thing he had left untouched, her old wooden tack box. The lid groaned as he lifted it. The air that escaped smelled of her. Leather conditioner, horse sweat, and that faint, wild scent of sage and perfume. His throat tightened. Inside, things were just as she'd left them. Brushes with strands of horsehair still caught in the bristles. A worn pair of riding gloves molded to the shape of her hands. His hands were trembling as he searched for a spare halter. And that's when his fingers brushed against it. Tucked beneath a folded saddle blanket was a small leather-bound journal. He knew he shouldn't. It felt like a violation, like reading the last page of a book he never wanted to end. But he couldn't stop himself. He sat down on the cold floor of the tack room, the smell of his wife all around him, and he opened her journal. Her handwriting was a familiar dance of loops and slants. The first entries were from 5 years ago, October 3rd. I found him today, up in the North Canyon by the old wash, a foal no more than a few months old, thin as a whisper. All alone. He has the strangest marking, a white slash over his left eye like a lightning strike. The vet says he won't make it. I say he will. Elias's breath hitched. He read on, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. November 10th. He's stronger. He finally took milk from the bottle. I've been calling him Traveler, because he's come so far and he still has so far to go. He follows me everywhere. My little ghost, April 1st, he's a yearling now, all long legs and clumsy grace. That wildness is still in his eyes, but there's trust too. He rests his head on my shoulder. It's the heaviest, most wonderful feeling in the world. Elias's own shoulder tingled with the memory. He felt sick. He kept reading, his mind racing, trying to deny what was taking shape in front of him. The final entry in that section was dated a year later, September 15th. He's gone. A cougar spooked the herd last night. He broke through the west fence and just vanished. I've searched all day. There's no sign, just the endless empty canyon. My Traveler is gone. The journal fell from his hands. It wasn't just a Mustang she'd found. It was him, her lost foal. The horse he'd found standing near her body wasn't a stranger drawn to the tragedy. He was returning. After 5 years lost to the wild, he had been on his way home. And he had found her. Too late. The air left Elias's lungs in a rush. The walls he had so carefully constructed didn't just crack. They vaporized. A sound tore from his throat, a raw animal noise of a pain so immense it had no words. He curled in on himself on the dusty floor, and the grief came. It came like a flash flood, a torrent of every tear he hadn't shed, every scream he'd swallowed, every ounce of the crushing, unbearable weight of his loss. He wept for Lena. He wept for the horse's lost years. He wept for the impossible, cruel poetry of their reunion in death. He didn't know how long he lay there, broken apart by the truth. But eventually he felt a warmth beside him, a presence. The Mustang was standing over him, its dark, knowing eyes soft in the dim light. It lowered its great head and nuzzled his hair, its breath warm against his scalp. It didn't try to fix him. It didn't pull away. It just stood there, a solid, living anchor in the storm of his sorrow, and it waited for the waves to pass. Spring came to Ghost Canyon not as a flood, but as a whisper. The snow retreated and the desert bloomed in shy, defiant bursts of color. Something inside Elias bloomed with it. He started calling the horse Traveler. He spoke to him, quiet conversations under the vast desert sky, telling him stories about the woman who had loved him first. The barn was no longer a tomb of memories, but a sanctuary of shared history. One bright, clear morning in May, Elias put a saddle on Traveler for the first time. The horse accepted it as if he'd been waiting his whole life for it. They rode out, not with any purpose, but just to move together. They rode past the fence line, past the familiar trails, and up toward the high ridges, and Traveler led him, with a deep, unspoken certainty, The horse turned off the main path and navigated the rocky terrain toward that one specific notch in the canyon wall, the place he had always stared at. When they arrived, Elias slid off his back. It was a small sheltered lookout with a view that stretched for 100 miles. Traveler walked over to a crevice between two large boulders and nudged it with his nose. Puzzled, Elias reached inside. His fingers closed around a cold metal object. He pulled it out. It was an old tin box, rusted from years in the elements. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside, protected from the wind and rain, was a faded photograph of a smiling, much younger Lena, her arm around a gangly, awkward foal with a jagged white mark over its eye. Beside it lay a small hand-carved wooden bird, the one he had made for her on their first anniversary. She had been coming here all along. For 5 years, this had been her place of hope, her place of waiting. She would ride up here with his gift for luck, and she would search the canyons for her lost boy. Traveler hadn't just brought him to a place.
He had brought him the final piece of her story.
He had carried her hope back to him. Elias leaned his forehead against Traveler's warm, solid neck, the photograph clutched in his hand, and he finally understood. He hadn't been saving some wild, abandoned horse all this time. The horse had been saving him. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the canyon in hues of fire and gold, they stood together, man and horse, watching the day end. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of a woman's unwavering love, a horse's impossible journey, and a man's second chance at life. Sometimes the ones who carry you are the ones no one else saw coming. If this story touched you, subscribe, leave a comment, and press the bell so you can be here for the next story that just might change your heart.